So in today's video, I'm going to share with you guys the differences between tabletop miniatures and display miniatures while I paint up this Genestealer Neophyte.
That the entirety of the cosmos is accessible through each and every individual's mind, connecting to the great mind, the great spirit.
Welcome back to the channel, collectors. This question has really bugged me since the start of my career as a commission painter, because where do we draw the line between display miniatures and tabletop miniatures? There are some really mind-blowingly good tabletop miniatures and some display miniatures that look just kinda meh. So in today's topic, I thought that if I painted a miniature that I painted previously to a display level and compare them side by side with something that I perceive that is tabletop, I think that this could be a good comparison to see what the differences are between tabletop miniatures and display miniatures. But in reality, let's face it, I believe that the differences are a lot more nuanced. There aren't just clear categorizations out there, but I believe that these differences will distinguish tabletop miniatures and display miniatures. So while the differences between tabletop and display level miniatures aren't really important, this video can also be useful if you want to take your tabletop miniatures up to the next level, or if you're thinking of doing different tiers of commission painting in your own businesses. These are some of the strategies of how I distinguish my tabletop miniatures from my display miniatures. Some of these changes really came to me while I was painting the Genestealer Neophyte up to a display level, so I really think that many of these differences actually intrinsically come from the painter themselves when we are painting the miniature, and some of the tricks that we try to employ while we are painting miniatures up to a better standard. But if you boil everything down, every single factor down, fundamentally the differences is the display level miniature just needs to take more time and more effort. Okay, so let's talk about the 6 points that I've distilled down that I feel are the differences between tabletop miniatures and display miniatures. So the first point that I like to bring up is the difference in definition. I would think that display miniatures tend to have more complex shapes in comparison to tabletop miniatures if you can compare my two Genestealer Neophytes. The second point for display miniatures, honestly, when I'm painting something up to a higher level, I try to break down my restrictions. I try to use more colors and be a bit more free with my paint jobs. Otherwise, it's just about following the steps so that you get a consistent result for tabletop miniatures. And the third point, definitely building up on the second point, is it allows me to use more extreme colors. For tabletop miniatures, it focuses on speed and it focuses on predictability. However, if I'm doing something up to display level, I would definitely experiment and maybe even use some very extreme colors into my paint job. And the fourth point is going to be adding little details. Some of these details, such as freehands and patterns, can be a bit complex and time consuming, thus it usually doesn't find its way onto tabletop miniatures. However, for a display miniature, it's definitely worth adding that little bit of effort to make it just a little bit more thematic. The fifth and next point is definitely part separation and blacklining. This is one of the key steps that you should always remember when you want to take your miniatures up to the next level. And the last point is, since we have coherent highlights, this is something that we often forget as painters, is to have coherent shadows. This is one stage where I place in all the shadows together to form one cohesive silhouette onto the miniature. So with all those points out of the way, we can start painting our Genestealer Neophyte. Okay, during the video I'll also be comparing this Genestealer Neophyte to my tabletop Genestealer Neophyte so we can see the differences. If you've not watched the other video, I'll leave the links to the other Genestealer video down there where I talk about stroke efficiency. So with that all out of the way, let's just prepare all these colors right here. Okay, let's prepare all these colors. And let's start on the first point to paint my Genestealer Neophytes, which is first to over-define and improve the definition on the miniature itself. Alright, ready? Let's get painting. Okay, so the first point is improving on the definition. Right here, I'm just going to be doing the base coating. Not much to see about the definition to improve it right here for now. But what you're going to see later, right, is the shapes that I'm going to be drawing onto the figure when I'm painting up the layers and when I start to highlight the miniature. Okay, so next up, we're going to mix in a little bit of a medium orange with a bit of medium rust. Okay, so this is where the definition starts to improve. Honestly, for the tabletop miniature, what I've done is I've just roughly slapped on the core shape, which is a cylinder for the arm. That's what I would have done for a tabletop miniature. However, as you can see right here on a display level miniature, I'm paying particular attention to the planes and the individual shapes very beforehand. Just adding it a little bit of light orange here to increase the value, but try to retain the saturation. You can see even so, while I'm not up to a edge highlighting stage, what I'm doing here is I'm painting in very particular shapes. So these shapes really help to define and communicate the shapes of the folds on this orange jumpsuit to the viewer rather than just maybe like a dry brush, because this really accurately reflects the planes to the viewer. And so with this, I'm gonna conclude this point by adding in a little bit of pale yellow, and this is finally where the highest highlight comes in. It's going to be very sparing, maybe even just like a edge highlight. However, as you can see with the definition, you have communicated to the viewer how the shape is going to be like for the folds on this orange jumpsuit. Okay, so after this edge highlighting, I'm going to be just moving on to base coating other parts. So I'm going to be using a little bit of this medium rust mixing with a bit of blue-gray, and I'm going to use it as the base color for the white ropes in front. This part is not particularly linked to the definition stage, but this is just one of the colors and processes that I'm working with to get the white ropes colored up. Now similarly, what you can see is I'm leaving in the brown in the shadows, and I'm paying particular attention to the shape and form that is facing the source light, which is on the right hand side. The key light that I'm placing on the right hand side is definitely something that I pay particular attention to derive the shapes of the individual parts. Just mixing in a little bit of light orange here just to raise the value but bring all the colors together. I'm gonna be just painting in the shapes. As you can see, just by defining and communicating the shapes very accurately, it really tells the viewer where the source light is coming from and how you can talk about the materials and the constitution of the makeup of this material. Is it matte? Is it glossy? These are some of the information that can be conveyed to the viewer if you define your miniatures properly. So we've defined the shapes and details of the miniatures. The next point that I'll show you is sometimes I like to do a little bit of random stuff and there is really no fixed direction or steps. You can always feel comfortable trying new things, giving the display miniature a little bit of something extra that you don't usually do. Okay, let's continue painting our display level Genestealer Neophyte right now. So the next point I'm going to talk about is to have no fixed direction. More often than not, we are always taught base coat, maybe each layer, wash. There's a fixed step that you like to follow. However, I'm just going to be randomly doing some wash here so that I can better gauge the colors and the coherency of this model. Alright, so now I've done some random things, and yeah, next thing is definitely going to try to incorporate some random colors and very extreme colors in to really boost up the saturation and to get a really eye-popping result. Alright, so let's go. Next up is the use of pretty extreme colors. I think this is something that I think it's really fun and you should give it a try. I would have never painted the base color in something so extreme like magenta from Chimera Colors. However, just because this is a display miniature, I want it to really pop, I want it to really stand out, and the use of such vibrant colors at the start will allow me to, well, essentially tone down the mid-tones and base colors to look like something a bit more normal. If you'd like to see me talk more in depth about this concept, about the most important color, you can always click the link down below where I talk about why base coating and color selection for the base coat is really important. This is just an extension of that topic, and I'm going to be using pretty extreme colors and slowly building up to something a little bit more muted such as the Genestealer skin, to have a little bit of purple on the under painting show through. Okay, as you can see right here, I'm always just adding in a little bit more dark flash, a little bit more light orange to raise the value. However, I'm trying my very best to retain a little bit of that saturation in the shadows so as to really show the dynamic range of saturation and value onto every single part of the miniatures that I'm painting. This is also one of the reasons why for the orange jumpsuit, instead of using a very deep brown, I'm going to be using medium rust previously as seen, so that it really pushes the saturation of the orange and the highlights further on into the miniature. Okay, as you can see, once you start to highlight, the saturation really drops and you can really showcase the whole range, and this skin tone is starting to look very eye-catching in my opinion. So right after that, you can always just add on a glaze of basic skin tone and use Lame medium, and this actually starts to soften down and blends all the layers together. So which is why I'm saying just be daring with your color choices, because it's always easier to tone it down later than try to make it more intense in the later stages. Wow, those extreme colors that I've added really made the skin pop. So next up, we're going to be adding in little details. I'm going to be painting in the freehand design and patterns on the pauldrons on the Genestealer Neophyte. So you don't want to miss that out. Okay, let's get painting the little details of the miniature right now. The next point is definitely to add little details. For me, I'm going to be adding some hazard stripes onto the miniature right here to showcase the design of the armor. Why we need to do this is because we are trying to mimic the scale and to communicate that this miniature is actually a lot larger in real life. Adding little details like this helps to show the scale of the miniature, because such patterns would exist in real life and it could signify a rank, it could signify a particular department that this miniature does work in. Now that the little details are in, we're going to make sure that again we start to define and part separate all the parts. What do I mean by this is we're going to start blacklining to start separating the different components of the parts. The armor, the skin, the little leather straps and all the other stuff. Okay, this is going to be a pretty straightforward step, but it's going to be very important. You don't want to miss this out. Let's get blacklining right now. This is pretty basic, but I would like to add on just doing some blacklining and part separation, because this really helps to define the miniature. This is what we use to do in a wash. However, for a display miniature, I tend to do this individually to really increase the definition of the miniature. Last but not least, on the display miniature, we always try to add more coherent shadows. Because we have produced a very coherent highlight already, let's get making the very coherent shadows right now. So the next stage is definitely to work into the shadows, because we have done so much for the layering and highlighting, but it would really suck if we forgot about the shadows. Having a coherent shadow, as you can see, really helps to frame the entire miniature, to tie everything down together. Sometimes in a tabletop miniature, doing this as a wash is nice to tie everything together. However, for display level miniature, every single detail needs to be considered and painted in rather than done in a mass painting technique such as a wash. And there we have it. This is the side-by-side comparison of my Genestealer Neophyte leader painted at the display level compared to the tabletop level stuff that I produced previously. Oh, you're still here. Thanks for watching the video all the way to the end. So I hope that I was able to share with you the small differences that I feel in a tabletop miniature and a display level miniature. So remember, if you want to support the channel, head on to the Patreon and become a patron. Every single dollar allows me to produce more videos such as these, and I'd like to thank my patrons for allowing me to continue producing videos like this. Thank you all once again. Remember, tag me on Instagram if you want me to have a look at your stuff, and I'll see you in the next video. See you.